With me, just introducing the panelists very briefly, I've got Marcel Haag, Director in DG FISMA for Horizontal Policies, which means virtually everything. I don't know how he does it. Ulrich Bindseil, Director General for Infrastructure and Payments. And Penty yesterday said any questions on the euro, go to Ulrich, he will have the answers. We've got Antony Cahill, who's the Managing Director for Europe at Weuro. And I think it's interesting to see how a more traditional payment scheme interacts and views the potential plans on the digital euro. And we've got Jaakko, Weuro, who is the head of banking in the Finnish finance ministry. And it's interesting to get a member state perspective. Sylvie Goulart already started raising the issue of the digital euro in our very first session. But maybe I start with you, Ulrich, to give us a little bit of a sense of your current thinking. We had questions about what's the scope of the digital euro? What will it look like? And what is it and what isn't it? So with these easy questions, I pass over to you maybe to start us off.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Nicolas. Thank you for inviting me. And luckily, I don't have to invent the answers really, but the state of thinking of the ECB was summarized in a report that we published in October. It's now a while ago, but let's say there was no fundamental rethinking so far. And the report is not very conclusive on the functional scope, but it mentions a lot of things in principle that could be there. So I would say the core maybe would be that it would look like any modern payment solution at the point of sale. And for online payments, it should, of course, be available in the entire euro area. It should be, by definition, risk-free central bank money. So it should not be a synthetic CBDC, as the IMF would call it. And then as one key scenario for launching a digital euro is the lesser use of cash and the preference of people to pay digital. Therefore, let's say banknotes and their properties are also a bit of a benchmark for the functional scope. And from that perspective, ideally, the digital euro would also offer privacy. I mean, reaching the same extent of privacy as for banknotes may be challenging, but as a benchmark it's there. Then the offline use, and again, banknotes are the benchmark, and be supportive of financial inclusion. So again, banknotes are the benchmark because everybody can use banknotes without having any equipment. And then the report already says it should be free of charge for basic use cases, and it should allow to control for undesired potential effects on financial stability and monetary policy. I would say that's a bit the core. Then, of course, the report also mentions as one motivation to support more generally the digitalization of society and the economy. So it should also fall in line with the digitalization strategy of the Commission, and there be open also to industry applications. And there some people see the need that it will become a programmable euro, which is of course a bit a different universe than the point of interaction usage for consumers. But everything we are in principle open, or that is being mentioned. I mean, we in the meantime, since that report, we had a public consultation with input where we also asked people what do you expect, and there was the most frequent answer in a multiple choice question with this regard was that privacy is extremely important. Obviously also security and pan-European reach, but really privacy stood a bit out in those 8,000 responses we got. Maybe I'll leave it there for the moment.
I think we'll have a lot of follow-up questions from this one, but also congratulations on the 8,000 responses. We seem to get more and more response to all these consultations each time. Marcel, maybe I pass over to you, because whatever the ECB is planning to potentially do, and I know the board decision is only expected formally in June, but fits into the broader retail payment strategy. And you know, a lot of the measures that you're taking supplement or provide the kind of basis for the success of a digital euro. So how do you see the interaction between DG FISMA and the ECB? I know there was this joint statement a few weeks ago, but how do you see that shaping up?
I see. Thank you, Nick, and thank you for having me this afternoon. No, it's still not afternoon. It's this morning. I think the work that we're doing is and that the ECB is doing is largely complementary. We are looking how the digital euro fits into our broader agenda, and Ulrich already made a couple of points that show how the links can be made, and then we want to support the ECB building on the expertise that the Commission has in some areas where the ECB may not have it to the same extent. We also are in an exchange on ideas and on the design issues of the digital euro. And here I must say, all the points that Ulrich has made are pretty much in line with our thinking. We see that the digital euro has fundamentally to respond to the needs and the demands that are created by the decline of the use of cash. The digital euro should be a complement to cash, and that means that it has to comply with a certain number of criteria. Ulrich has mentioned them. They have to be. The digital euro has to be innovative, fast, safe, convenient for both consumers and businesses. It has to be cost-free or almost cost-free, and it has to coexist with existing payment systems, and that is part of how we have designed our payment strategy. If you look at the broader picture, then the digital euro should fit, and I'm positive that it will, with our broader digital agenda, with our industrial strategy for the next generation industry. It has the potential to contribute to the competitiveness of the European industry. The digital euro also has the potential of contributing to our strategy on open strategic economy of the European Union, and it has also. We also see possibilities of using the digital euro to strengthen the role of the international role of the euro overall. All of this is part of the conversation that we have with the ECB, and in that context, we're discussing a broad agenda from the objectives that will be actually pursued, and that will then also have an impact on the design. There are many design issues that are still open, and that we need to look at. Maybe I'll leave it at that, and happy to go into a more detailed question.
Yeah, yes, I think we will come to that. And by the way, we're already starting to receive quite a few questions coming in, so I will bring those in a moment and remind the audience, please feel free to ask questions. Maybe Jaakko, over to you, kind of as the third representatives from the public authority side. we all wait with excitement that finance ministers will adopt conclusions in March on payments and retail payments as well. How do you view the digital euro from a finance ministry perspective, a country that traditionally has always been very, very focused on ensuring monetary stability and generally stability of the financial system, but also from a country that is known for very innovative payment solutions. So how do you see the digital euro potentially fitting into that policy space?
I have to start by saying that it's a very particular topic to comment. It's not so often that we get to discuss such a topic that could have potentially very fundamental ramifications in terms of the financial system. We are used to talk very difficult and complex issues in the financial services domain, but this is really a topic that is a very fundamental one. From Finland's point of view, and I could imagine that the same would apply to many governments. I think, and what I'm saying is at the moment the staff level reflection. Actually, our government is having a ministerial discussion next week on this topic to form actually an initial view on the report. But our overall starting point is quite positive. It's a very important work that ECB has launched, and the report that was presented is a very thorough one, and it's a very challenging and ambitious project. But at the same time, it's important that this work has been started, and I think we welcome this, and it's important that we are prepared in the time of changes, and should there be such scenarios that the ECB presents in the report, it's good that we are prepared. But at the same time, as I said, it could be a very fundamental change potentially. And at the moment, there are still quite big questions to be answered, and a lot of depends then, of course, on the next steps. So at the moment, we would say that the right questions have been raised, and but also our thinking will, of course, have to be specified when we understand better what are the next steps and choices in terms of the implementation. But of course, the issues that we are looking into are the ramifications to financial stability and monetary policy transmission. What would be the impact on the banking system? And of course, there are legal questions to be asked and answered still. But a lot of depends on what kind of direction this project will take next. So in a way, we are in a positive mood, but at the same time in a wait and see mode, so that we see the next steps and can develop our thinking further.
Thank you, Jaakko. And I think you've touched on a few of the issues that we were kind of trying to unpack in a moment in a bit more detail. But before we come to that, Antony, I'm going to be deliberately provocative here because we kind of had a few hours of kind of ongoing conferences. To what extent do you think the digital Europe is eating up your lunch as an established international payment scheme? How do you see your interaction with the potential digital euro?
Well, good morning, Nick, and to my fellow panelists. And what a question to start with. But in terms of the question itself, overall, Nick, Visa is we're positive about the whole concept of digital currencies and CBDCs, and we believe they are a positive development in the payments ecosystem. We strongly believe that it's an evolution of money. It's been brought about by changes in commerce and technology, and Visa already is engaging heavily with many digital currency platforms around the world. So we're already sort of dealing with more than 35 today. I think specifically coming back to the digital euro, I sort of go to where I guess my fellow panelists have been in many ways. This is very early in the thinking process today. And we will always come back to a few sort of core questions. Number one, is there a clear consumer benefit and a clear consumer demand for the introduction of the digital euro? And will it in fact be complementary to other offerings that exist? And I think there's a real question there that certainly needs further work. Secondly, certainly if it's going to mimic cash, as you know, Ulrich's already pointed out, the digital euro will have to really sort of display a couple of key attributes of ideally being made available offline. This notion of privacy, and I think the whole question of privacy is going to be very interesting in terms of the attributes you have with cash today. It's going to be very difficult to see those full attributes coming through in relation to the introduction of a digital euro. But if it's complementary to other offerings today and it can add to the payments ecosystem, it's positive. And then I think one of the third questions, though, that we ask, and again, it's still very early in the piece, there are still some key questions that need to be worked through and answered over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months. One is, what is the commercial model? Secondly, what's the resilience and security that's going to be associated with the introduction of the digital euro? And I think a third key question is, will commercial banks, and there's a real question, and it's actually raised and discussed within the paper that came out in October, this question around potential disintermediation of commercial banks through the introduction of a digital euro. So I think at this point, I'd sort of go where Jaakko was, which is generally we're positive about this. We see it as a positive development, and we certainly believe that private enterprise, including Visa, can play a role in both shaping and helping and supporting the growth and delivery of digital payments. You know, to your direct question, do we see it as a threat? No, we don't. We view it as a change in the landscape, and one where there may well be commercial opportunities for Visa, and we think the payments landscape can continue to develop. Having said that, some of those key questions absolutely need to be worked through in the coming months to ensure that the payments ecosystem sees benefit, we have competition, we have a commercial model that can actually work. So the idea of, from policy perspective, yes, that's one point, but actually ultimately for a digital euro to be successful, we'll need to answer some of those key questions.
Thank you. And I think together with Jaakko, I think you've elegantly kind of moved me into the type of questions or set of questions I would like to explore now. One is kind of the commercial incentives around this. And then a bit later, let's call it the broader societal or consumer incentives around this. I know it's difficult to work that out if you don't actually know what the animal looks like. But I think there's nonetheless some let's say, aspiration around this. And I think maybe, Ulrich, I come back to you first, which is, I know it's difficult to say, but how does it fit into the existing banking system and into the existing payment system? It's based, with these traditional ideas about, central bank money flowing through the banking system to the private sector or public sector. It's an important monetary policy transmission mechanism, and also it is effectively open to all participants, where you have to be a bank, but beyond that, it's open to all the system, and you've got kind of a wholesale payment system at the heart of this. How does a digital Europe either fit into this or revolutionize that traditional model?
I think there's no revolutionary agenda. I mean, some people, if they hear CBDC, have a revolutionary agenda. So they perceive this as a way to eventually, get a sovereign money system where banks would no longer offer sight deposits, because those people believe that this is at the, let's say, origin of all the problems of financial instability. But the ECB does not agree with that. So the report says quite the opposite, that there's no intention to revolutionize. There is the intention to partner. There's the intention to not disintermediate banks. We don't want to see the Eurosystem balance sheet balloon at the expense of banks funding through sight deposits. And there are tools to do this. So, I mean, they are very effective tools. There's no doubt, you can put a limit to holdings. You can, apply a tiered remuneration where high balances would not be remunerated as attractively as, let's say, risk-free other short-term investment forms. So there are definitely ways to control it. I have no doubts on this. I mean, getting let's say, the balance between private payment solutions and digital euro right will be interesting, because I think we have the tools in the hand to make it more successful than maybe we want, or to make it, a failure. So both is possible. So I think if the functional scope is very broad and would even encompass, let's say, SEPA instrument payments, so really a kind of account functionality what banks are offering, and we would have no limits on our accounts, and remuneration would be, fair at least, then you have the potential to crowd out really the banking system. You will have a great success of your digital euro, but maybe more than you want. On the other side, of course, if you put a lot of constraints, if you say you can hold only, I don't know, 1,000 euro, and you can only use it, for specific, very specific narrow things, then it lacks attractiveness, and it will also fail in this other way. So this is really will be key, to get functionality right. And then the commercial model that Antony mentioned. I mean, for banknotes, I would say the past logic was, for the central bank, this is a money-making machine to be able to issue interest-free liabilities in a world where you have on the asset side a nice remuneration as central bank, and so that's it. That dominates every issue of cost recovery. I mean, here, okay, one thing is you could say we enter the world, or we are now in a world of no positive carry really in issuing monetary liabilities. Okay, but that holds for everything. But more interestingly, we really get into the habitat of private digital payments. So we must be more careful and think more in detail on what commercial model should apply. I mean, where there would be elements of cost recovery, or also of payments payments to agents who do something for distributing the digital euro. So that is a more subtle set of questions that indeed has to be looked at. I have to disappoint Antony, however, on the timeline. I mean, Antony, you were saying this has to be clarified in the coming months. No, this will take longer. I mean, if a project is being launched, then you start with an investigation phase where you both look at the functional scope and all those issues of, the commercial model. And the time horizon for that is not, if it would be launched in the summer, it would not be a few months, but it would be more in the area of, let's say, more than 1 year for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's understood. It will take time. All of your infrastructure projects take a little bit longer than a year from past experience, because they're quite very ambitious. But maybe one short follow-up question before I go to Marcel, which is, if we stay very close to the traditional banking system, I'm going to be slightly cynical here, and based on the conversation with Sylvie this morning, what is the added value of the digital euro to very efficient electronic payments? If we on the same time move towards instant payments and faster, more efficient payments, where is kind of the crossover that this is valuable if it is very closely embedded in the existing banking system? Or if we then say it isn't, and we move more to DLT, distributed solutions, how do we then ensure that the banks still remain part of that system? That is, I think, a big challenge. And I don't know, sorry, it's more kind of getting your reactions on that one, Ulrich.
I mean, one thing is, of course, to distribute the digital euro and to have the front end. And I think there the report goes in the direction to say this should be done by regulated entities. We will not set up a parallel universe. And then again, the question on the functional scope, what is the value added for the consumer? I mean, I would take here an economic perspective in the sense that, I mean, payments are a crucial part of life in a society which relies on specialization, the division of labor. We pay all the time. So it is, you know, it's at the core, let's say, of life in our society. And therefore, and it's a network industry, no? So this combination where easily a few players become predominant, no? And if they are predominant, they have some market power, they can exert this market power. And so far, you know, for large parts of consumer activity, we had as a fallback solution, or more than a fallback solution, as a very frequent solution to pay with central bank money, which then also is a way to put competition into this market. And if we move to more and more towards digitalization, we of course move away from this. I mean, already now in online payments, you know, e-commerce, you cannot pay with cash. So it's such a big market, so crucial for citizens, and there are those network externalities. So if the public sector can stay in the business and also offer one solution in such a huge markets, then we are far from having an overcrowded situation, but we have ensured to the citizen that there's one, let's say, option which is designed in the interest of the citizen for the basic important needs, and which also competes with private sector solutions, you know, which can remain richer and more innovative and maybe even better in some respects. Of course, we want the digital euro to be decent, to be, you know, as convenient and as efficient in principle as private sector solutions. But somewhere we will draw a line for the functional scope and will not try to, you know, have every innovation that the private sector can offer. But that is basically the proposition. In addition, you have the sovereignty issue that is stressed, that payments, again, being such an important activity, has been predominated by very successful international firms to a growing extent. And in addition, we have now big techs, you know, looking at this market and coming in and being ambitious. So again, there, of course, we want the European private payment industry to also succeed, to stabilize or to regain market share. But in addition, we see a scope for, from the perspective of sovereignty, to have also this offer to citizens and firms.
Thank you, Ulrich. That's very clear. Marcel, kind of a few things have been mentioned. Let's take an assumption, but if we don't quite know what's exactly the nature of the animal, I think Ulrich framed it quite well. There will be some bank involvement. It will be most likely issued through regulated entities. There you come in because you regulate those entities that then become supervised. It will be issued through the central bank payment system or RTGS system in one form or another. What do you see as some of the regulatory, you know, implications or kind of facilitators for the use of the euro? One that comes to me obviously is that non-bank payment providers, regulated non-bank payment providers, need to have access to the interbank payment system. That brings us to the Settlement Finality Directive. Another one might just be, you know, introducing certain functionalities for the end user, like amending the you know, basic payment account directive or whatever else it might be. Have you started thinking about, you know, some of the policy implications to facilitate the rollout of such a digital Europe, whatever it might look like?
Nick, we have just heard it's still early. It's early days, and we are not yet clear about some very basic functionalities and design features of the digital euro. So I think it would be too early to now start thinking about what amendments of the acquis we will need precisely. I mean, we need to know whether, you know, the digital euro will be account-based, will it be token-based, will we have the indirect intermediation that Ulrich alluded to, and to which we are very attached. We think that is necessary to ensure the complementarity and and avoid a crowding out of private actors. We need to know about all of this, and then there's the privacy concerns that Ulrich has already mentioned earlier on. But there's also our policy regarding anti-money laundering and protecting us against terrorist financing, which the digital euro ultimately has to accommodate for. So there is a plethora of things, and but it is still too early to say what adjustments we will ultimately need. That is something that we will work on as the design features and the objectives of the digital euro will clarify.
Thank you. Maybe allow me just one or two follow-up questions, Marcel. One is, and I take your point about not crowding out private solutions, both existing payment solutions, but maybe also we've heard about, private crypto asset issuance, which might happen quite quickly from what we understand. We have the proposal, the MiCA proposal, and attachés are discussing it today. If a digital euro comes about as a fairly broadly applicable means of payment, it would be very cheap. It should be very cheap. It should be trusting the ECB's capabilities, very efficient. What is the scope really for private solutions? Because under MiCA they have to have regulatory capital, they have to manage a reserve, they have to meet all kinds of additional requirements. If I look at that burden to entry for a private player compared to a very efficient digital euro, I'm going to be slightly provocative here. Why are we discussing an e-money token? Because that e-money token in the private sector might no longer be commercially interesting or viable in a few years' time.
Well, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure about that. Our thinking goes more along the lines of yes, indeed, the digital euro has the potential of competing also with stable coins, Libras, the Libras of this world. But we think that that's per se not a bad thing. But we do not see the digital euro necessarily killing the market for stable coins in Europe. The framework that we are establishing that we have proposed for stable coins does not pursue the objective of driving the stable coins out of the market and make room for the digital euro. I think what we require, and what we propose to require, I should rather say, are the safeguards that we believe are necessary to allow businesses and citizens to use those stable coins safely and confidently.
No, thank you for clarifying and reassuring some of the people in the audience who are beavering away and developing crypto assets. I think the other question is, again, it depends on the design. I know we'll have a much more concrete debate maybe in a year's time on the digital euro, but the ECB's paper puts two scenarios on the table, not complementary. They don't exclude each other, they could be complementary, but one is kind of a bank-issued traditional digital euro, and one which is kind of a digital bearer euro, which is kind of an electronic banknote, for lack of a better word. How do you see that then fitting with anti-money laundering? We're expecting, of course, this a big package from you in May or so, but in a way you make it easier again, to potentially avoid AML, because so either you kind of link it into a regime and some public key so you can see who actually owns it and uses it, which would really help with AML and anti-terrorism financing, or you accept it to be like a note, but then you can hide it even quicker under your mattress than the physical paper note.
Yeah, I think here well, first of all, I think there is a clear tension between our objectives of protecting privacy and ensuring a high level of privacy, also in the context of a digital currency, and our objectives to prevent anti-money laundering and terrorist financing. But that also exists in the world of cash. And also in the world of cash, we have rules that aim at making anti-money laundering and terrorist financing more difficult. And one could imagine similar safeguards also in the digital world by limiting amounts and so on and so forth. So I think the challenge is not identical with what we are facing with physical cash, but the way we design our anti-money laundering strategy for physical, in a physical world, shows that there are ways to address the challenge of anti-money laundering.
Thank you. Maybe Antony, I pass back to you, kind of having listened to this. I mean, yes, a key element in the commercial design of a digital euro is who participates, obviously. How the revenue, any potential revenue is shared, because ultimately payment providers still have to kind of, act as intermediaries in this whole chain. And also how it links into some of the other payment evolutions that we're seeing, the growing role of APIs and what was just discussed by my colleague Danny in the previous panel, interacting, with other kind of applications. So it's also early to say because we don't really know what the animal looks like, but what would you say would be some high-level principles that should apply in designing a commercial framework around this?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And I did want to just pick up on, I think Marcel's highlighted a really good point there, that there are some natural tensions with some of the objectives that are being pursued. And as we move forward, clearly there'll be more debate on this, more discussion, and hopefully a pragmatic solution can be reached. And it sort of goes to this point you're asking me now, which is we actually believe there's a lot of innovation taking place, and I think you can see it today in Europe in the payments landscape, and you've just spoken to some of those innovations. Now, one of the things that drives innovation, of course, is the ability to make a return on investment. And there's hundreds of millions of dollars a year being spent across the payments landscape by many different players across Europe. And I think it will be important to ensure that if a digital euro is introduced, that it doesn't stifle this commercial ability to invest, to innovate, and to actually make a reasonable return. So that's really important, I believe. Secondly, of course, having a digital euro, for it to be used, acceptance is going to be key. And again, as you've highlighted, there are many players in the payments value chain today, and maintaining the ability for those providers to make a reasonable return is tremendously important. So I think that needs to be acknowledged. This idea of what can the digital euro bring, and can that sit alongside other payment solutions? Yes, in that a digital euro, if it mimics cash, will have payment finality associated with it. With some of the payment, with the private solutions and the schemes, for example, the ability for consumers to be protected and have chargebacks, etc., that is something that consumers value, and they seek to use that. So I think it's tremendously important that those pieces are absolutely worked through, and that it is absolutely an open platform that I think for the digital euro to be successful, I believe the central banks can absolutely, or the central bank can lay out the the basic functionality, which I think is, as Ulrich has indicated, these are some of the things it can have and should have. But private enterprise should be encouraged then to innovate, to drive, and to bring new use cases to the market. So this ability to ensure that it can be accessed and you can sort of continue to drive innovation is particularly important. And I know on the prior session before this, listening into that, some of the participants again were sort of saying that's absolutely critical. And so I think as this plays through, and reading the document that came out in October, I was really pleased to see that the questions are well understood, they're acknowledged. It's not that we have answers yet, and I think this conversation in the last half an hour or so has highlighted that there are many open questions. To your point, in 12 months' time, we may be able to have a far more solid conversation because some of these points will be starting to land. I think it's critical that regulators and policymakers do engage with private enterprise and others to ensure that their perspectives are taken into account, because there are so many decisions that do need to be made. And again, personally, I'm positive about the development, about what the digital euro could bring. But I do think there are natural tensions in the system, and they will need to be explored and understood and acknowledged, actually. Otherwise, we could find ourselves going down a pathway that won't add to the overall system. And ultimately, if the commercial model does not work and consumers and citizens and businesses don't see a clear need for the digital euro, then technically it may work, policy-wise, yes, it may work, but ultimately it won't be successful.
I think you make a really good point there, Antony, around acceptance. I mean, we've just come out of another experience that I don't want to spend too much time on, but strong customer authentication under the implementation of the PSD2, and has taught us how acceptance can become a big challenge in the payment chain, and where certain dates can be imposed on the industry or dictated, but might not be met, or might be met, but might be met in 20 different ways because the interpretation of what is the objective is different. And I guess what you're saying in the acceptance space is the same, so that even if we do get a digital euro a year, 2-3 years after political strategic decision has been taken by the ECB, it doesn't mean all of the industry will be ready. There needs to be time and acceptance and common standards around this, which have to be developed in one form or another. So there's a whole work stream on that one. Marcel's team will work on that, but it's too early to say now. But I think it's a very important point around the acceptance. Having seen new technology implementation or new infrastructures being built, Antony, what are some of the elements that need to be taken into consideration in building acceptance?
Well, I think, and not surprisingly from Visa's perspective, this is where we believe we have a role to play. And as I mentioned earlier, we already deal with 35 digital currency platforms around the world today. And those digital currency platforms, the users of those platforms get to make use of Visa's acceptance network. So they already have access to the 60 million merchants that Visa already has agreements with today. And so that's where, again, I think private-public payment solutions can come together to enable acceptance to happen. But if that were the case, then as has already been mentioned, there are multiple players across the value chain, be that the acquirers, for example, network providers, etc. And I think this is where that natural tension will come through, because Ulrich mentioned ideally a digital euro should have the same attributes as cash, i.e. being either free or very low cost. And I think free will be hard to ensure that players across the ecosystem then can make an appropriate return. So that needs to be worked through, because as I said earlier, there's hundreds of millions of euros spent per annum in investment, and secondly, operating those systems around resilience, security, etc. Is not an insurmountable, it's not a small task. So that needs to be well understood. I think the other piece as well is education, and this was again made, I think, in the prior session, in that education will be tremendously important, both for citizens and businesses. What is a digital euro? How is it used? What are the use cases, etc. So that's a significant task, actually helping the ecosystem understand the benefits, how it can be deployed. And it will be a number of years for that network effect to take place.
Yeah, Jaakko, there was a question that came in which I would like to ask you, which is, what could the governance of a digital euro look like? I guess, again, depends on what the digital euro is, and I guess they were more thinking of a decentralized model. But is there something exclusively for the ECB, or how would you, as a representative of one of the member states, want to be involved in such a structure, or how do you think such a structure should look like? I see we don't even have a digital euro yet, but people are already thinking about where the authorities should be based and who should chair it, which is a usual European debate. But how do you see that?
Indeed, yeah, that's always a very good question, where it will be seated. But I mean, seriously, I think one would need to look very closely into the direction of Frankfurt, I would say. So, and I think it's important that that ECB is very much on the driver's seat in this project, and ECB. I'm also referring to the euro system as a whole, because if we're talking about really a digital euro currency and something that would have the role and legitimacy and seriousness, for instance, cash, this of course needs to be a project that is embedded in our euro area governance, and ECB has a very crucial role there to play with, especially when it comes to euro money and payment systems. So I would leave the discussion on the governance aside for a while, and I would. This is clearly a task very much also for the central banks to play, because this is one of the statutory roles of a central bank, and that's why I think we are eagerly waiting for the next proposals. But if I would want to comment a bit on the previous discussions, if I may, Nick.
You're very welcome to, Jaakko.
No, I would think that what will be really the key is the kind of a customer interface, because I think that will drive a lot of the use case, and I think a lot will depend on do people find this as a useful tool. And if it will be so, I think the rest will follow. I mean, of course, we think about it from a policy perspective and a legal perspective and technological and commercial perspective. But if one looks at it from the customer perspective, people are looking for killer apps, so to say. And so far, I don't think we have such available. I mean, we have very good projects on the market. Also in my own country, I will not mention any names to be neutral, but still, even though there are good products available, if one looks the bigger picture and asks oneself, has there really been a revolutionary product, new product since the invention of online banking? The user faces nowadays look much nicer than they used to do, and now we have also them available in our smartphones. But at the end of the day, does it, from a customer perspective, has anything really changed since the advent of online banking, which in Finland was in the late 1980s and especially in the early 1990s. So I would say that the issue is partly also what will be the kind of a customer user base be, and then the question is, and also looking at the ECB report, because if one of the scenarios is also that we need to be prepared if there is foreign or private alternative that quickly regains or quickly takes up a market share, and we should be prepared for that kind of a scenario. I mean, if we want to be prepared for that kind of a scenario, I would believe that the reason behind such, let's say, market move would be that there would be a player that would offer something that is a kind of a killer app for the end customer. And then, of course, if we want to provide serious alternative, then the digital euro needs to provide an alternative that is nice and easy and wonderful to use. And I think that will be the decisive thing, because if it's a good product and if it will create added value, I think the customers will choose it, and they will not look so much into the theoretical underpinnings. And maybe that also answers a little bit the question that why the work that we are doing around MiCA, for instance, is important, is because we as regulators need to make sure that the product is also robust from a legal, theoretical, and financial stability point of view, because the end customers will mainly only look into what is good and easy for them, and as they should do. But there is this kind of a division of labor. So I would say that the customer interface will be important, and I think there's a kind of a shared interest to create a good one, because if we don't do it, then we will not be able to respond to, let's say, outside competitor.
Thank you very much indeed, Jaakko. I think you've brought me to a point where I just want to ask one question that came from the audience to Ulrich that builds really nicely on this. And if you can indulge me for 5 minutes, I would just like to get your reactions on the international connectivity of a digital euro. Marcel talked about the international role of the euro, and I think it's important that we maybe close on the international interconnectivity of a possible digital euro. But one question to you first, Ulrich, which is, you've built TIPS. It was an expensive exercise, a very efficient exercise. We're now trying to roll out instant payments. We've got the scheme in place for a few years. Rollout has been quite remarkable, but it's not quite there yet. So now we're thinking of a new project. And I think, I'm not sure whether instant payments has become the killer app at the moment or not. But I think this is a really good question. How do you see those investments and all these efforts that are going into initiatives like TIPS, instant payments, the European Payments Initiative, all these things that are being built, and now we're building something else again? How do you see those things interacting without us explicitly knowing the consumer benefit right here, right now? There is some, but we don't know the quantity of it.
Well, Nicholas, I would say it's a huge market, and the move of payments from cash-based to electronic increases the size of this market further and increases the risk from the perspective of the consumer that there's market power and concentration in this market, and I don't think the market will be overcrowded, even if we have instant payment-based POI solutions in addition, and a digital euro, just because of the scale of this market and the increasing size that will materialize with a shift from cash to digital payments. In a certain way, the central bank enters these markets together with the volumes that maybe were previously in cash payments. No, that's one of the reasons why the central bank enters this market. So I don't feel the market will be overcrowded, will be subject to excessive competition. But I think there's space there both for, let's say, a European instant payment-based POI solution and the digital euro and the incumbents as well. And even maybe big techs entering with their ideas. It's a big market.
Yeah, I confess I agree with you. If I look at the evolution of payments over the last 15 years and how many different business models there are, I take your point. Marcel, maybe to the international dimension, international connectivity of this. We discussed with Sylvie a bit earlier the CPMI work and the FSB work about reducing costs of remittances and facilitating cross-border payments. And obviously the euro should take a bigger market share of that. That's the whole objective of the internationalization of the euro. So how do you see the digital euro fitting into this G20 objective and this wider EU commitment to increase the acceptance of the euro?
Yeah, and again, I mean, without offering ready-made solutions on this one, we think that the digital euro should be inclusive. It should be available to everyone, including possibly to citizens that are not banking, and we believe that there the digital euro, and we think we have to explore that. Ulrich mentioned the euro should be available inside the euro area. Definitely, that should be our priority. But then we believe it would make sense to also explore the potential of the digital euro to play a role in international transactions, and indeed remittances would be one of the areas where we believe we should explore whether the digital euro could play a bigger role.
I think, Antony, from your perspective, you're part of an international, very efficient card scheme. How do you see the international interconnectivity between different initiatives and different jurisdictions around digital currencies at the moment by central banks?
Yeah, I mean, I've read the report in depth, and I've seen the sort of the view that this piece around the international connectivity, and the report actually highlights some potential risks actually about making the currency widely available outside the euro area that would need to be considered. But I think it's clearly a topic of conversation in terms of the cost of remittances. But in actual fact, I'm personally a big believer in competition, allowing the private sector to compete, and you're actually seeing very significant reductions in the cost of remittances over the last 2 or 3 years as new solutions have come to the market. So again, for me, if the digital euro is meant to represent the digital manifestation of cash euro, then it doesn't necessarily need to have that interoperability and overseas transactional capability, unless you see what are the benefits. And I keep coming back to that. What are the consumer benefits? And I think Jaakko sort of highlighted that as well. What's the killer app, or what's the place that consumers will flourish to? And for me, I think private competition is continuing to drive down that cost of remittances. And certainly from Visa's perspective, that's what we specialize in that cross-border connectivity, and we will continue to invest in that and certainly bring new innovation to the market. So I note that it's a policy, or it's part of the design document and the discussion document. I don't see that so much as a burning platform, given the improvements that we've seen both in terms of speed, in terms of transparency and cost.
There's, of course, this commitment by the Bindseil committee of a number of central banks to coordinate their work on digital currencies. They're very early days. It's really, I think, very much commitment at the moment. But as you design the digital euro, to what extent do you consider to kind of work together with similar initiatives in other jurisdictions, maybe not in Venezuela, but some of the other jurisdictions that are developing digital currencies, as to how that interaction, to ensure some complementarity or similar security features and other elements?
Yeah, maybe let me come back for a second also to the general point on the international usage. So yeah, obviously already now, world currencies are used internationally in different ways. I mean, from the international circulation of cash to a currency of account. And so lots of things can be imagined. And of course, if we open up to international usage, we also, let's say, open up the financial stability effects to another dimension, the potential ones. And just to mention one example, of course, if a Japanese investor now wants to hold a risk-free euros, we'll have a remuneration, a yield of minus 60, 70 basis points. So a digital euro freely available could be and offered to the entire world, but at an interest rate which cannot be, minus 60 or minus 70. It has to be lower because otherwise we have a huge effect on balance sheets, on monetary policy, etc. So I think there the only way to really open it in an unconstrained, rather unconstrained manner to the world would be a remuneration rate clearly less attractive than risk-free investments in that currency. And more generally then on the collaboration, yes, I mean, there is a G20 work stream on cross-border payments, where digital euro is one of 20 building blocks, where the IMF is also involved, because digital currencies will have effects not only on the issuing central banks, but also on the countries where usage will take place. I mean, they can have capital outflows, exchange rate effects, etc. So this is being discussed collectively. And I think between the major central banks, there's a consensus that this is a matter to move only when we have a commonly understood framework of cross-border usage. I mean, we need a collaborative approach, and I haven't heard any central bank who has put that in question.
Thank you very much indeed to this panel. What's clear is there's a lot of questions. I think it was interesting to raise that and talk about this. I think what I take away is that point about the killer app, Jaakko, or about the use case and the consumer need. I think it's clear that we will have a panel next year on this, and I guess in between, in a different context, once things become clearer. But for now, big thank you to the four of you for a very open and very frank conversation